The house had been a dream, an idyllic, sprawling farmhouse nestled in the heart of the countryside. Its weathered charm and sprawling fields seemed like the perfect escape for the Fields family. Yet, the real estate agent's vague warnings about its history were easy to brush off as superstition. Old houses had secrets, after all, but who truly cared? It wasn't until the second week that Evelyn Fields, the mother, found the tunnel. She had been folding laundry in the dim, musty basement when the edge of a carpet curled beneath her foot. Beneath it was a trapdoor. The hinges screamed in protest as she opened it to reveal a dark, narrow tunnel sloping downward into the earth. "What is this?" she murmured, but no answer came. Her husband, Todd, dismissed it as an old root cellar. "We'll explore it later," he said, too busy unpacking boxes to give it much thought. But Evelyn couldn't stop thinking about it, and that night, the whispers began. At first, they were faint, a rustling sound, like wind moving through dead leaves. But each night, they grew louder, more insistent, until they became distinct murmurs that seemed to coil through the air and into the bedrooms. The voices grew clearest in the room of their youngest, 6-year-old Lily, who had started sleepwalking since their arrival. On the fourth night, Evelyn woke to find Lily standing at the top of the basement stairs, her small hand resting on the railing. She was mumbling something under her breath, her voice eerily calm. "Lily?" Evelyn whispered, her heart thudding in her chest. The little girl didn't answer. She slowly descended the stairs, her feet padding silently against the cold wood. By the time Evelyn reached her, Lily was standing directly above the trapdoor. Her wide eyes stared down at it, and she whispered a single word. "Come." Panic clawed at Evelyn's chest as she snatched Lily up and carried her back to bed. But the next morning, Lily remembered none of it. Desperate for answers, Evelyn began digging into the house's past. At the town library, she uncovered a series of faded newspaper clippings from the 1930s. The farmhouse had belonged to a man named Clarence Dunn, a quiet recluse who had gained infamy after police discovered he had murdered at least a dozen people and buried their bodies beneath his property. The tunnel in the basement, as it turned out, was where Clarence had dragged his victims to their final resting place. Evelyn's hands trembled as she read the final detail. Clarence had been executed, but he was rumored to have cursed the house. "They'll never leave me," he had reportedly said with a cold smile. That night, the whispers turned into screams. Todd woke to the sound of Lily shrieking. She was gone from her bed. Evelyn and Todd ran downstairs to find the trapdoor wide open, the tunnel gaping like a mouth waiting to swallow them whole. From its depths came Lily's voice, calling out in a sing-song tone that was not her own. "She's mine now," the voice crooned, echoing against the earthen walls. Without hesitation, Todd charged into the tunnel, with Evelyn following close behind. The darkness was suffocating, the air thick with the stench of damp soil and decay. As they stumbled forward, their flashlights flickered, casting fleeting glimpses of skeletal remains embedded in the walls. And then they saw her. Lily stood at the far end of the tunnel, her back to them. Her small frame trembled, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. She turned slowly, her eyes black as coal, her mouth curling into a grotesque smile. "You shouldn't have come," the voice rasped from her tiny body, but it was not Lily's voice. It was deep, guttural, and filled with malice. Terrified, Evelyn screamed, "Let her go." The ground beneath them shuddered, and the walls of the tunnel seemed to close in. Todd lunged for Lily, grabbing her and sprinting back toward the light. Evelyn followed, her heart pounding as the whispers swelled into a deafening cacophony of anger and pain. They barely made it out before the tunnel collapsed behind them, sending a plume of dust into the air. Lily's eyes fluttered open, her soft voice breaking the silence. "Mommy? What happened?" Evelyn pulled her daughter close, tears streaming down her face. But deep in her chest, she knew it wasn't over. The house had secrets. And some secrets refused to stay buried. The house at the edge of the village had stood for centuries, its dark silhouette casting an eerie shadow over the fog-filled moors. No one in the village could remember a time when it wasn't there. The locals spoke of it in hushed whispers, warning strangers to stay away, but to no avail. For Clara Matthews, the house was an irresistible enigma. Clara, a writer of Gothic novels, had heard the tales, of course, stories of the house's former inhabitants, of strange happenings, of a tragic death that left the house cursed. But she dismissed them as nothing more than local superstition. It was perfect for her next book, a decaying manor, an ancient family secret, and the promise of mystery lurking beneath the floorboards. When Clara arrived, the house greeted her with a chill. The once grand estate had fallen into disrepair, ivy creeping up its stone walls, windows boarded up, and the front door groaning on its hinges. Yet, Clara felt an odd pull toward it. She set down her suitcase and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, the floor creaking underfoot. The scent of old wood, mildew, and something faintly metallic lingered. Clara felt an unsettling sensation, as though the house was alive, watching her every move. She shook it off, determined to settle in. That evening, as night fell, she sat in the grand library, the flickering light of a solitary candle casting long shadows on the walls. The silence was absolute. But then, there came a sound, a low, almost imperceptible creaking, as though something was moving upstairs. Clara froze, her hand hovering above her notebook. She had expected the house to be unsettling, but this was different. The air around her grew colder. She rose slowly, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet, and crept toward the staircase. The stairs groaned as she ascended, and with each step, the silence deepened, as though the house itself was holding its breath. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched out before her, the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the grime-covered windows. The door at the end of the hall was ajar, the softest whisper of movement escaping from the crack. Clara moved toward it, each step more hesitant than the last. As she reached the door, the air seemed to pulse with an unnatural force. She pushed the door open with a creak and entered. The room was small, sparsely furnished, with only a tarnished mirror hanging above the fireplace. But it wasn't the room that caught her attention, it was the reflection in the mirror. Clara's heart skipped a beat as she saw herself, standing at the door. But something was wrong. Her reflection moved, its lips curling into a sinister smile, eyes glowing with a malevolent light. Clara stumbled backward, her breath caught in her throat. The reflection in the mirror moved again, this time raising a hand to the glass, as if beckoning her closer. Without thinking, she stepped forward, drawn in by an unseen force. The moment her fingers touched the cold surface of the glass, a wave of darkness enveloped her. The world around her warped and twisted. The walls of the room seemed to bend and collapse in on themselves, and in an instant, she was no longer in the house. She was standing in a vast, barren wasteland, the sky overhead swirling with storm clouds. The ground beneath her was cracked, the air heavy with the scent of decay. Shadows moved at the edge of her vision, flickering and shifting like living things. A voice echoed in her mind, soft but insistent. "You should have never come." Clara spun around, searching for the source, but there was no one. The shadows seemed to be closing in, and she could feel the presence of something ancient, something angry, surrounding her. The ground trembled beneath her feet, and suddenly, a figure appeared before her, a tall, thin man, his face obscured by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. He raised his hand, and with a single, fluid motion, Clara was pulled toward him. She struggled, but her body wouldn't obey. She tried to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. The man's voice was a low growl in her ear. "You were never meant to leave." Then, the world shattered. Clara awoke with a start, gasping for air, her heart racing. She was back in the room, the mirror now cracked, its surface reflecting a fractured version of reality. The silence was deafening, but something had changed. The house was no longer empty. Figures moved through the shadows, their outlines barely visible in the dim light. Clara's eyes widened in horror as she saw them, a family, their faces gaunt and pale, their eyes hollow. They were the house's former inhabitants, their souls trapped within its walls, doomed to wander for eternity. One of them, a woman, stepped forward, her voice a whisper on the wind. "You have freed us," she said, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. "But now, you are ours." Clara tried to run, but the shadows swarmed around her, pulling her toward the mirror. As the darkness closed in, she felt a cold hand on her shoulder, and the world went black. The house had claimed her. And now, it would never let her go. The old mansion had stood alone on the outskirts of town for as long as anyone could remember, its sprawling grounds overrun with weeds and brambles. The locals called it, the Hollow, a name that sent chills through even the bravest hearts. It was said to be cursed, haunted by a family long dead. But for Samantha Harper, a young journalist with a taste for adventure, it was the perfect story, an opportunity to uncover the truth behind the legends. Samantha had heard the rumors. She had heard of the mysterious fire that consumed the mansion nearly 50 years ago, the fire that claimed the lives of the Hollow family. But she had also heard that there were strange occurrences, things unexplained, that still clung to the ruins. Determined to uncover the truth, she packed her bags and set off, leaving behind the safety of her apartment for the unknown. When she arrived, the mansion loomed like a specter, its crumbling facade bathed in the dying light of the setting sun. The windows, once grand and ornate, were darkened by soot and age, as though they had not seen light in years. The front door, hanging crooked on its hinges, beckoned her inside. Samantha stepped over the threshold, her flashlight casting long shadows on the floor. The air inside was thick with the musty scent of neglect and decay. The grand staircase at the center of the entryway was a twisted skeleton of what it once was, the wood warped and splintered from years of exposure to the elements. She hesitated but pushed forward, determined to explore. The mansion creaked under her weight, the sounds of her footsteps the only noise breaking the silence. She made her way through the dusty hallways, the walls lined with faded portraits of a family long forgotten. Their eyes, dark and unblinking, seemed to follow her, making her skin crawl. Each step deeper into the house seemed to drag her further from the real world, until she found herself standing in front of a door, unlike the others. It was pristine, untouched by time, and seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. Without thinking, Samantha reached for the door handle, the cold metal biting into her skin as she twisted it open. Inside, the room was pristine, too pristine. The air was thick with the scent of something sweet, almost intoxicating. The floor was covered with a rich, red carpet, the walls lined with golden trim. But at the center of the room stood an object, a large, ornate mirror, framed in intricate silverwork. The glass was so clear it seemed to shimmer, almost alive. And in its reflection, Samantha saw herself, but there was something wrong. Her reflection smiled, but the smile was too wide, too sharp. Her own eyes, normally brown and warm, had turned a milky white, hollow and empty. Samantha stumbled back, her heart racing. She blinked, and the reflection shifted. The figure in the mirror was no longer her, but a pale woman with long black hair, her face twisted in agony. The woman's mouth opened, and a voice echoed through the room. "You shouldn't have come." Samantha backed away from the mirror, but as she turned, the door slammed shut behind her with a force that rattled the walls. Panic surged within her as she struggled to open it, but it was no use. The room seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, the temperature dropping with each passing second. The woman's face in the mirror twisted into something even darker, her eyes now black as coal, her expression one of pure hatred. "You cannot leave," the voice whispered, a low rasp that sent shivers down Samantha's spine. "The Hollow calls to you. You are one of us now." Samantha screamed, but no sound came from her mouth. The room around her began to shift, the walls closing in, and the air became thick, suffocating. She ran toward the mirror, desperate to escape, but as she reached it, the glass began to ripple like water, pulling her in. No. Samantha cried, but her hands were already being pulled into the glass, her body moving against her will. She struggled, but it was no use. The mirror was alive, hungry, and it had claimed her. The last thing Samantha saw before everything went black was her own face, distorted and trapped in the reflection, smiling back at her with those same hollow eyes. The next morning, when the townsfolk passed by the hollow, they noticed something strange. The door was ajar, the mansion silent as always. But if they looked closely through the dusty windows, they could see her, Samantha Harper, her face pressed against the glass of the mirror, trapped within, her eyes wide with terror, her mouth silently screaming. And from that day forward, no one dared to venture near the hollow. For the mansion had claimed another soul, and its dark, cursed mirror would never let her go.